Okay, let's just jump right in. We are about to take a deep dive into what is, I think, one of the most foundational, maybe one of the most intellectually charged legal dramas in all of Western history.
It really is, and it's so much more than just a drama.
Exactly. We're not looking at it just as a piece of history today. We're going to treat Plato's account of the trial of Socrates, the Apology, as a complete masterclass in philosophical defense, in argumentative strategy.
That's absolutely the right way to frame it. Our mission for this deep dive is very specific. It's quite rigorous for you, the learner. We're intentionally skipping over some of the more famous narrative elements.
Right, like the drama of the death scene, the arguments about whether he should have escaped prison.
Exactly. We're setting that aside and focusing purely on the engine room of the text. We want to extract the conceptual glossary he uses, and I think most importantly, trace the logical backbone of Socrates' arguments, all while he's under, immense pressure.
So we're treating this text like a philosophical blueprint.
That's the perfect term for it. A blueprint.
Because we want to answer that central question. How did this man, this 70-year-old man, in the face of his own execution, construct a defense that didn't just defend him, but essentially indicted the very society that was judging him?
While at the same time justifying his entire life's work, it's an incredible performance.
It is. So we're bypassing the rhetoric to get straight to the hard, logical nuggets of knowledge that are embedded in this text.
And our source material for this is, of course, the core text of Plato's Apology itself. Now, it's important to remember this isn't a stenographer's transcript. What we're analyzing is Plato's brilliant artistic and philosophical recreation of that speech.
The crucial distinction.
It is. And from that recreation, we're going to be pulling out the precise premises, the historical context you need to understand, and the very unique definitions that Socrates relies on to build his defense. A defense against what he calls this long-standing, powerful, societal slander.
All right, let's get to it. So before we start dissecting the individual arguments, we need the big picture, the roadmap.
The thesis statement.
Exactly. If you were forced to condense Socrates' entire life, all 70 years of that relentless self-examination, his public activity, and then this culminating defense into one single powerful philosophical message, what is that core claim? What's the executive thesis he's laying out for Athens?
Okay, that's the challenge. The executive thesis, the one singular coherent sentence that summarizes his entire defense, I think has to be this. Socrates' lifelong obedience to the god's directive to examine himself and others to demonstrate the worthlessness of human wisdom constitutes the greatest public service and is fundamentally just, rendering the charges of injustice and impiety logically and ethically baseless.
Wow. Okay, that is a phenomenal summary. It's so dense because it ties everything together. The divine command, the political claim of being a public benefactor, and then ultimately his defense against the formal charges.
It has to. He's arguing they're all one and the same thing. That oracle, his questioning of people in the marketplace, even his poverty, they're all just elements of this single divinely justified mission.
But to really feel the weight of that defense, we have to understand the temperature in that courtroom. This wasn't some, quiet academic debate. This was an emotionally charged, high-stakes political trial.
Oh, absolutely. And that is the essential contextual note we have to establish right now. Socrates is on trial in 399 BCE. This is post-war Athens.
And when you say post-war, you mean they just suffered a really devastating loss in the Peloponnesian War.
A catastrophic loss. The city was reeling, not just from the military defeat, but from the political chaos that came after, including the absolutely brutal oligarchical rule of the 30 tyrants.
And this detail is so critical. A lot of the key figures who are associated with that tyranny, people like Critias, for example, were, and this is the important part, former associates of Socrates.
Precisely. Now, to be fair to Socrates, he himself opposed the tyrants. He even talked about how he risked his own life by refusing one of their illegal orders.
He does. He mentions it in a text.
But the association was enough. It was enough to poison the well. The atmosphere in this newly restored democracy was just thick with suspicion. It was paranoid.
So intellectual dissent, which is what Socrates was all about, wasn't seen as productive criticism anymore.
Not at all. It was seen as dangerous, as something that undermined civic authority, something that could potentially breed more of these anti-democratic figures who question the foundational myths and structures of the city.
So his defense is really a response to this civic authority that is trying to clamp down on philosophical inquiry because they see inquiry itself as a destabilizing force.
Yes. And that brings us to the deeper philosophical problem that the text is really grappling with. It's this fundamental conflict between two completely different ideas of wisdom.
Okay, explain that.
On one side, you have what you could call the popular claims to wisdom. This usually means having a good reputation or political power or maybe a specialized technical skill. You're a great shoemaker or a celebrated general,
The things people respect.
the things people respect. And on the other side, Socrates offers something totally different: genuine self-aware ignorance. He claims that this is the only necessary foundation for living an ethical life.
Which is such a paradox.
It's a total paradox. He's basically arguing that the city is persecuting him for delivering this uncomfortable, divinely mandated truth. It's a clash between reputation and reality.
And that commitment to reality, to that truth, over his own survival. That's why he refuses to plead or use manipulative rhetoric. It elevates his whole argument, which brings us straight into the two core logical defenses he mounts.
Exactly.
Socrates faced this really unique challenge. He says it himself in the text. He knows that the most dangerous opposition isn't coming from the guys prosecuting him, Miletus, Aeneas, and Lycon.
Right, the formal accuser.
Yeah, he says the real danger comes from the first accusers, this sort of amorphous group of people who had been poisoning the public mind against him for years, for decades.
And that slander was, as he says, uncross-examinable. You can't put a rumor on the witness stand. It was built on jokes and comedies, on popular belief. So it's a masterful strategy for him to decide to tackle that unseen enemy first. It really is, because he understands that the formal charges, corrupting the young, impiety, they're just the symptoms of a much older disease, and that disease is the fear and the resentment that his questioning has caused for so long.
So he needs to justify his entire controversial life's work before he can even begin to address the specifics of the indictment.
He has to. He has to explain why he does what he does.
So let's start there, with his defense against these old accusers. The slander, as he puts it, painted him as this dangerous kind of intellectual.
The classic caricature.
Right. A wise man, a thinker on the things aloft, someone who investigates things under the earth. But the most politically toxic accusation was that he makes the weaker speech the stronger.
And that's a direct shot. That basically means he's a brilliant manipulator, a rhetorician who can make injustice sound just. It's the charge they leveled against the sophists.
And it even appeared in popular culture, right? Like in Aristophanes' comedy, The Clouds.
Yes, he mentions it by name. He knows that many of the jurors probably saw that play when they were younger and formed their opinion of him right then and there. So he needed a justification for his behavior that was, unimpeachable, something non-negotiable.
And he chooses divine command.
He chooses divine command, delivered by the most respected religious authority in the Greek world, the oracle at Delphi. This isn't just him telling a story. This is the foundational premise that transforms his meddling into a sacred duty.
Okay, so let's lay out that foundational logical chain, because this is the argument that underpins his entire philosophical existence.
All right, this is the chain of reasoning that has to stand up against decades of hatred. It starts with premise 1. The god, speaking through the Pythia at Delphi, declared that no one was wiser than Socrates.
And this was a message brought to him by his friend Chaerephon.
Correct. So that's P1, then P2. Socrates himself is conscious that he is not at all wise, either much or little. This is the core of Socratic wisdom, that profound recognition of his own ignorance.
A direct contradiction.
A direct contradiction, which leads to P3. The god cannot say anything false. This is a non-negotiable theological assumption for a pious Greek. The god cannot lie.
So you have these three conflicting pieces of information. The god says he's wise, he knows he's not wise, and the god can't be wrong.
Exactly. So what does he do? This leads to P4. Socrates goes on a quest to investigate the people with a reputation for wisdom, the politicians, the poets, the artisans, and he finds they all confuse their specialized skill with universal wisdom.
They think because they're good at one thing, they're wise about everything.
Precisely. They suppose they know things they do not know, while he, Socrates, only knows that he does not know. That's the key distinction.
And that investigation leads him to his interpretation of the oracle's meaning.
Yes, that's P5. He concludes that the god intended him to serve as a pattern or an example. The god was saying that the wisest human is the one who, like Socrates, recognizes that his own wisdom is worth little or nothing.
So Socrates isn't special because he's wise. He's special because he understands the worthlessness of human wisdom.
He is merely the instrument of the oracle's true message. Which brings us to the conclusion, C1. Therefore, Socrates' controversial practice of philosophizing and examining others is an indispensable, divinely ordered service to the god. It is not meddlesome injustice.
Okay, let me stop you on P3 for a second. The god cannot lie. For a, probably skeptical Athenian jury, why should a theological assumption like that be a valid premise in a legal defense? Isn't he risking coming off as arrogant, relying on this private divine revelation to justify breaking all these social norms?
That is a brilliant point, and it's where you see the genius of Socratic rhetoric. He isn't actually asking the jury to believe the oracle on faith. He's asking them to accept the logical consequences of the oracle's statement, which they, as religious Athenians, would at least have to nominally respect.
Ah, so it's a shared premise, at least in public.
It's a shared public premise. P3 isn't negotiable for the god, but for the jury, it serves as this powerful point of tension. If the god represents truth and Socrates finds himself totally ignorant, that's P2, then the god must be trying to communicate something much deeper than just a personal compliment.
So the whole investigation, P4, all those painful cross-examinations.
They're not about him trying to prove the oracle wrong. They're his attempt to verify the oracle's meaning without questioning the god's truthfulness. It's an act of piety.
So the investigation itself is a religious labor. It's a demonstration of the god's true meaning. Let's get into that labor a little more. What exactly did he find so, I guess, offensive about the wisdom of the politicians, the poets, and the artisans?
The problem was epistemic arrogance. It was an arrogance born from specialized skill. When he went to the politicians, he found that they were highly regarded by everyone, and especially by themselves, but they knew almost nothing of importance about justice or how to live a good life.
They could give a good speech, but there was no substance.
No substance when you really push them. Then he went to the poets. They could create these beautiful, moving verses, but when he asked them to explain the meaning of their own work, they couldn't do it. They seemed to operate by a kind of divine inspiration, not actual knowledge.
And the artisans, the craftsmen, the people who actually made things.
The artisans are such a crucial example because they did possess true specialized knowledge. They know how to forge bronze or build a ship or make a pair of shoes.
They actually knew something.
They did. But this specialized knowledge led them into a fatal error. Because they were excellent at their specific craft, they assumed they were also wise about the greatest things, like how to govern a city or what virtue is or morality.
And that's the confusion he's pointing out. The confusion of technical skill with universal wisdom.
That's the core of the problem he exposes, and that process of exposure, the elenchus, the Socratic method of showing these prominent men who claimed wisdom that they were actually profoundly ignorant, that is why he generated so much widespread fear and hatred.
Because no one likes to be shown up like that, especially not in public.
Exactly. The elenchus is the tool he uses in P4, and the practice itself is the divine service he's talking about in his conclusion. This relentless, annoying public questioning is what makes him the famous gadfly?
Right, the gadfly analogy. If his actions are a divine service, what does that actually look like in practice?
He says he sees Athens as this great and well-born horse. It's noble, it's powerful, but it's also rather sluggish because of his great size and needs to be awakened by some gadfly.
So the city is this magnificent beast, but it's gotten lazy, complacent, just relying on its past glory. And Socrates is the necessary irritant.
The necessary irritant. His job is to awaken, persuade, and reproach, to sting the horse into action.
And he makes a big point of emphasizing the purity of his motives. He contrasts himself really sharply with the sophists.
He does. He talks about his 10,000-fold poverty. He says he does this service without any pay, often neglecting his own family and his own affairs. And he argues this dedication proves the divine nature of his service.
The argument being, no one would choose to live like that, to be poor and hated just to meddle in other people's business.
Right. Not unless they truly believed they were compelled by a higher power. It's his proof of concept.
Okay, so having justified his entire life as a way to counter that old slander, he finally pivots. He turns to dismantle the specific formal charges brought by Miletus and the others.
The charges of the later accusers.
Yes, that he corrupts the young and that he does not believe in the city's gods, but in other daimonia that are novel. Let's tackle that corruption charge first, because his logical dissection of Miletus here is just devastating.
It is a stunning display of, you called it philosophical jujitsu earlier, and that's exactly what it is. He uses his opponent's momentum against him.
So Miletus's claim is basically that Socrates is the only person in all of Athens who is corrupting the youth.
An absurd claim on its face. He says Everyone else, the judges, the councilmen, the guys in the assembly, every single Athenian is making them better, and Socrates is the lone corrupter.
And Socrates just points out how ridiculous that is. He uses that analogy of the horse trainer.
The horse trainer analogy, right? He says, look, when it comes to horses, only a specialized few, the trainers, actually benefit them. The general populace, the many, if they try to handle horses, they usually just mess them up. They corrupt them.
Yeah, and it would be absurd to claim the opposite is true for the much more difficult and important task of educating a human being in virtue.
Exactly. But the real philosophical weapon he deploys here is what we can call the involuntary harm argument.
Okay, let's break that down.
This argument is so clever because it's designed not just to prove his own innocence, but to completely expose Meletus's lack of genuine concern for the youth he claims to be protecting. The core assumption is rational self-interest, something every juror would understand.
So what are the premises?
Okay, premise 1. No person wishes to be harmed by the people they associate with. That's a basic survival instinct.
Makes sense. You don't want your friends to hurt you.
Premise 2. The bad, or the villainous, always do harm to their closest associates. If you corrupt the youth, you make them into bad people, and bad people are harmful to be around.
Right, so if Socrates corrupts the young people he hangs out with, he's basically creating a dangerous environment for himself.
Precisely. Which leads to premise 3. If Socrates is corrupting the youth, and therefore making them villainous, he must be doing so involuntarily. Because why would he knowingly and willingly make the people around him worse, knowing they would then turn around and harm him? He wouldn't knowingly harm himself.
The logic is so tight. So that leads to his sub-conclusion.
The sub-conclusion, C1. If the corruption is involuntary, if it's an accident, then the law doesn't demand punishment, certainly not a death sentence. The law demands teaching and private admonishment.
You don't execute someone for an accident, you correct them.
You correct them. And the implication is just inescapable. Meletus is either prosecuting Socrates for an accident, which is unjust, or he is knowingly prosecuting an innocent man, which is malicious.
So in either case, Meletus is in the wrong.
In either case, Socrates concludes that Meletus has revealed his own lack of care about the young, because if Meletus truly cared, he would have come to Socrates privately and tried to teach him the error of his ways, rather than dragging him into court on a capital charge.
That's fascinating. He completely shifts the burden of moral proof back onto the accuser. It's less a defense of his own actions and more an indictment of Meletus's legal competence and his moral intent.
It's a total reversal.
Okay, so now let's move to the second charge, the impiety charge. This one is politically explosive. Not believing in the city's gods, but believing in these other daimonia that are novel.
This charge was incredibly dangerous. In Athens, you have to remember, religion and civic life were completely intertwined. To introduce novel divine signs, this daimonion of his, was seen as disrupting the state religion and, by extension, disrupting the state itself.
But again, Socrates just tears this charge apart by forcing Meletus into a glaring logical contradiction.
He really does. He even says that he thinks Meletus is either joking or just trying to pose a riddle because the charge is so self-contradictory.
So let's analyze this daimonia argument.
Okay, so P6. Socrates gets Meletus to admit, under oath, that Socrates believes in and teaches about daimonia divine matters or divine signs. This is drawn directly from Meletus's own sworn testimony.
So he uses the accuser's own words as his first premise.
His own words against him. Then, P7. Socrates establishes that daimonia, by common Greek understanding, are either gods themselves or they are the children of gods. You know, like heroes or demigods.
A standard piece of religious knowledge.
A standard belief, which leads to the logical trap, P8. It is logically impossible to believe in the children of gods, the daimonia, without also believing in the gods themselves. He uses the analogy of mules. You can't believe in mules without believing in the existence of their parents, horses, and asses.
The offspring requires the parent.
The offspring requires the parent. And so we get to the final conclusion, C2. Therefore, Socrates' belief in daimonia necessarily requires that he believes in gods. This proves Meletus's charge complete atheism to be a contradiction in terms, a piece of, as he says, hubristic jesting.
It's just a clean, logical win. Meletus cannot accuse him of believing in divine things, while at the same time claiming he doesn't believe in divinity at all.
The contradiction is absolute. Meletus tried to conflate two different charges. The charge of atheism, which is not believing in any gods, with the charge of novelty, believing in different gods. By forcing Meletus to stand by the novelty charge, the daimonia Socrates demonstrates the logical impossibility of the atheism charge.
So his defense against the formal accusers is this brilliant dual victory. He justifies his entire life as a divine service, and then he proves that the charges themselves are built on just logical absurdities and outright malice.
That's it in a nutshell.
That structural rigor is so important, but I feel like the argument really relies on Socrates' specific philosophical vocabulary. We can't fully grasp the power of the apology unless we understand that he wasn't just using common Greek words, he was forging them into precision philosophical tools.
That is such a crucial pivot. You're absolutely right. We have to move from the structure of the arguments to the specific definitions that give those arguments their force.
So let's build a kind of conceptual glossary. Let's start with how he characterizes his opponents in this rhetorical battle, the people he's constantly being confused with, the orators and the sophists.
Okay, good place to start. Number 1, clever speaker orator. Socrates redefines this term right at the very beginning of his speech. His accusers use it to mean someone who is persuasive, who uses, and I'm quoting here, adorned phrases and words, but might be saying nothing true.
A spin doctor, basically.
A spin doctor. Socrates flips this completely. He says he will agree that he is an orator only if an orator is someone who speaks the truth. For him, truth is the only defining characteristic of genuine speech, not eloquent manipulation. It's a direct contrast between his plain-spoken, honest approach and the art of deceitful rhetoric.
Okay, and what about his own specialized and very strange type of intelligence?
Right. Term number 2, human wisdom. This is maybe the core concept of Socratic philosophy as he presents it here. It is that specific, limited self-knowledge he possesses, the deep realization that he is not at all wise, either much or little.
It's defined by what it isn't.
It is. It's fundamentally characterized by knowing what you do not know. And critically, he says this wisdom is worth little or nothing. The value isn't in the wisdom itself, but in the self-awareness that allows him to serve as the god's example, exposing the false wisdom claimed by others.
And this stands in stark, direct contrast to the professional educators of his time.
The sophists. So that's term number 3, sophist. Socrates defines sophists here very strictly as professional educators who charge money to teach young men. He names names. Evenus, Gorgias, Prodicus.
He's making it a professional financial distinction.
He is. By defining them that way, he creates this rhetorical distance. He explicitly and repeatedly denies he's one of them. I do not have knowledge of them, men of Athens, he says. He's emphasizing that his motivation is divine and his service is unpaid, reinforcing the purity of his purpose, unlike the sophists who were famous for commanding these massive fees.
Okay, now for the most politically dangerous concept, the source of that impiety charge.
The daimonion.
Yes, term number 4, daimonion or the divine sign. This is his distinctive, personal, internal divine voice. And you have to understand the political danger here. This was a novel sign. It was personal link to the divine that completely bypassed the state-sanctioned religion, the temples, the priests.
It was private revelation, which is threatening to public order. Very threatening. And philosophically, its function is very specific. It acts only negatively. It always turns Socrates away from a course of action, but it never explicitly tells him what he should do.
It's a divine veto power.
A divine veto. And this becomes crucial at the end of the trial. The silence of the daimonion throughout his trial and condemnation is interpreted by Socrates as definitive proof that what is happening to him facing death must actually be a good thing. Because if it were evil, the sign would have intervened and stopped him.
That is just a stunning piece of self-assurance, to interpret divine silence as implicit approval of your own execution. It's incredible. All right, next, let's define excellence, or what the Greeks called ardelo.
Term 5, virtue or arto. The word really means excellence, or making something the best it can possibly be. In the legal context he's in, he says the virtue of a judge is to consider what is just, while the orator's virtue is to speak the truth.
So it's about fulfilling your function properly.
Yes. But more profoundly, for Socrates, true human virtue is the state of the soul being the best possible. This is his highest priority. He says his entire mission is to persuade people to care for their soul and its perfection before they care about money, reputation, or honor. This elevates moral concern above everything else, including physical survival.
And what he fears most, what he considers the only true evil, is the opposite of that.
Right. Term 6, injustice. For Socrates, injustice isn't just a legal offense. It's a deep moral failure. It's a harm that you do to your own soul. He defines the villainous as those who do something bad to whoever are nearest to them.
Which connects back to his corruption argument.
It does. The true ignoble act that he refuses to commit is valuing his own survival over acting justly. He will not flee, he will not stop philosophizing, because that would mean disobeying the god and speaking untruths. He states it very clearly. Injustice and disobedience are the known bad things that he will never do.
Which leads us directly to probably the most famous line in the entire text.
Absolutely. Term 7, the unexamined life. This is a life lived without that constant philosophical self-examination, without that rigorous, continuous testing of yourself and others about virtue and truth. This is the culmination of his whole mission.
And he makes that definitive, incredible statement.
The unexamined life is not worth living for a human being. He would rather die than give up this process of scrutiny because he believes that without it, human life loses its essential, morally aware value. It becomes something less than human.
And finally, his justification for not being a politician or a businessman. How does he define his own role?
Term 8, God's gift service to the god. This refers to his continuous activity, his philosophizing and questioning in the marketplace. He argues that the fact he does this without pay, and often at great personal risk and poverty, proves it's not some personal venture. It's a unique, irreplaceable gift of the god to the city of Athens.
So he frames his public inaction as a form of higher public service.
Exactly. He explains that he deliberately avoided a public political life because his daimonion always kept him out of it. It knew that an honest man focused on pure justice cannot survive for long in the muck of public life. This reinforces his ultimate claim. He served the city better by staying private and obeying the divine directive than he ever could have by holding public office.
These definitions really do sharpen his entire defense. It becomes so clear that he wasn't just defending himself against a couple of charges. He was redefining for the entire city what it means to be a truly ethical, a truly wise, and a truly good citizen.
And that redefinition is his ultimate legacy.
So now we arrive at what you're calling the crux, the one passage that is maybe the densest, but also the most philosophically radical and, I think, rewarding.
It is. This is where Socrates ties his core concept of Socratic wisdom, knowing that you don't know, directly to his completely fearless stance on death. This is the absolute heart of his ethical philosophy.
And understanding this passage is essential for understanding why he refused to beg for his life, why he refused the offer to just stop philosophizing and go free. Let's hear it.
He looks at the jury and he says, "For to fear death, men, is in fact nothing other than to seem to be wise, but not to be so. For it is to seem to know what one does not know. No one knows whether death does not even happen to be the greatest of all goods for the human being. But people fear it as though they knew well that it is the greatest of evils. And how is this not that reproachable ignorance of supposing that one knows what one does not know?"
Wow. That is so intensely layered. He's taking the most fundamental, universal human reaction, that instinctive fear of mortality, and he's diagnosing it as an intellectual failing. The fear of death is just another kind of ignorance.
It's the ultimate example of it. Let's break that down into plain English. The common fear of death, he says, is a prime example of that reproachable ignorance he spent his entire life trying to cure people of.
But why? Why is it ignorance?
Because if you fear death, you are operating under the assumption that death is the greatest possible evil. But, as Socrates argues, we have absolutely no empirical knowledge, no data whatsoever about the nature of non-existence or the afterlife. Nobody has come back to tell us.
So to fear it as the greatest evil is to claim you have knowledge where none exists.
You're pretending to be wise about something you know nothing about. So the common human reaction is fundamentally unphilosophical. It violates the one piece of human wisdom he claims to have, knowing that you don't know.
Okay, so he contrasts this unknown risk of death with what he sees as a known certainty.
Exactly. A known certainty of moral failure. He says, look, I suppose that I do not know about what happens in Hades, but he does know with absolute certainty that injustice, disobedience to the god, and cowardly abandonment of his divine duty are bad and shameful things.
So the choice he's facing isn't between two known evils or two known goods. It's a choice between a known, quantifiable moral wrong on one hand and a totally unknown outcome on the other.
And because that unknown outcome, death, might actually turn out to be the greatest good, as he argues a bit later, it cannot logically outweigh the certainty of committing a moral wrong, like betraying his mission. He will never, ever flee or fear the unknown thing over the known evil of injustice.
We should use that analogy we talked about, the paradoxical investment, to make this moral calculus really clear. Because this is a moment of profound, high-stakes moral accounting.
Okay, let's frame the choice. Imagine you're an investor, and you're facing a choice right now between two outcomes that are going to define your entire integrity.
Okay, so option A. This is the certainty of a known quantifiable loss. A loss to your integrity, your soul, your moral standing. Let's say you have to accept a $10,000 loss right now. And accepting that loss involves doing something morally shameful like lying under oath or abandoning your deepest principles to save your company. That's the known certain evil. That's injustice.
All right, now option B. This is facing a totally unknown, completely unquantifiable market event. You have zero data. The risk is immense. You could lose everything. This is death, the great unknown. But, and this is the critical part, it also might turn out to be the greatest financial windfall of your life. You simply have no possible way to assess the risk, whether it's good or bad.
So the typical investor, the fearful, arrogant investor, the one who's exhibiting that reproachable ignorance, he assumes that option B, the unknown risk, is definitively worse than option A. And so he chooses the known moral failure. He takes the $10,000 hit to his soul, he tells the lie, he makes the compromise just to avoid the risk of the unknown. He prioritizes survival over morality.
But the truly prudent, the Socratic investor, recognizes that the only quantifiable real loss in this scenario is the moral failure. That $10,000 compromise, that's the injustice. And since the unknown risk, option B, might actually turn out to be a great gain, and the known loss, option A, is certainly and definitively shameful, the only truly rational choice is to accept the unknown risk over the known evil. You fear the moral compromise, not the physical uncertainty.
And by laying it out this way, Socrates is essentially arguing that his accusers and the jurors who are advising him to just stop philosophizing to save his own life are exhibiting the very ignorance he has tried his whole life to cure them of.
It's the ultimate ethical inversion. He's saying you are the ignorant ones for fearing death more than injustice. And he reinforces this by offering two beautiful philosophical possibilities for what death might actually be, making it seem not just tolerable, but maybe even desirable. And that completely undercuts the power of the jury's verdict.
Let's talk about those. The first possibility is the one that anyone can immediately grasp. Death as a dreamless sleep.
He says, if death is just like being nothing and the dead man has no perception of anything, then it is a wondrous gain. He uses this wonderful little thought experiment. He says, think about your whole life. Pick the best days and nights you've ever had. Now compare them to a night where you slept so deeply you didn't even dream.
And his suggestion is that for most people, the pleasant days are easy to count.
They are. So he concludes, if all of time spent dead is like that, nothing more than one night of perfect dreamless peace, then it is the greatest possible rest. It's superior to even the best parts of living.
But the second possibility is the one that's truly for the philosopher, the migration of the soul.
This is where Socrates really leans into the ancient myths of his culture. He says, what if death is a journey to Hades, where all the great heroes and figures from the stories are there? What greater good could there possibly be?
It's the philosopher's paradise.
It is. It means escaping the corrupt, unjust judges of Athens and getting to associate with the true mythical judges, Minos, Rhadamanthys, and the great heroes like Palamedes and Odysseus, who were themselves victims of unjust trials.
So he could continue his life's work, but with a much better class of people and free from the hostility of the living.
Absolutely. He says he would have the opportunity to continue his Elenchus forever. He could examine the great figures of history, finding out who among them was truly wise and who was not. He could continue his divine mission of figuring out who truly knows what they claim to know. That, he concludes, would be inconceivable happiness.
So death, in his view, is either the greatest rest or the greatest opportunity. In either case, it simply cannot be an evil.
And therefore, it is not something to be feared.
We have traced the complete logical architecture of Socrates' defense. And what we've witnessed is not just a defense against a couple of formal charges. It's a monumental assertion of the primacy of the examined life and the sovereignty of the individual soul over the demands of the state.
And I think the key lessons we've established for you, the learner, engaging with this text are simple, but they're also incredibly radical. First, that Socratic wisdom isn't about having a head full of facts. It's not about possessing comprehensive knowledge. It's about recognizing the profound limits of human understanding. It's rooted in self-aware ignorance.
Second, that true excellence, true argekuro, demands that you prioritize the well-being of your soul, your moral trajectory, over everything else, over caring for wealth, social standing, or even your own physical survival.
And third, that injustice, moral failure, or disobedience to your higher duty, for him, the God's command, is the only thing that is truly worth fearing, because it is the only known evil. Everything else is just uncertainty, and uncertainty can never logically trump moral certainty.
And Socrates maintains this incredibly radical ethical stance even after he's condemned to die. He shows this profound lack of bitterness towards the men who voted against him.
He does. He recognizes they acted out of a desire to harm him, but he trusts that because he acted justly, the outcome will ultimately be good for him. He can't be harmed because the only real harm is harm to the soul, and he has kept his soul pure.
And his final request to the Athenians is really his final philosophical instruction. It's his way of ensuring his legacy extends beyond his death.
It's so poignant. He asks them, when my sons grow up, punish them, men, and pain them in the very same way I pained you, if they seem to you to care for money or anything else before virtue. He is asking the jury to become gadflies for his own children.
He's guaranteeing the continuation of his philosophical project within the very city that he spent his life serving, and that is now killing him.
It's his ultimate gift back to Athens.
And he closes the entire apology with a statement that is just the perfect encapsulation of Socratic humility and intellectual honesty. It acknowledges the unknown, while at the same time confirming his complete peace with his decision.
He says, "But now it is time to go away, I to die and you to live. Which of us goes to a better thing is unclear to everyone except to the God." That final thought just drives it home. He is acknowledging the limits of human wisdom right up to the very, very end.
And that leaves us with the final provocative thought for you, the listener. If the unexamined life is truly not worth living for a human being, as Socrates so powerfully insists, what is the single most important assumption about your career, about your core values, your relationships, or your future security that you have always taken for granted, that you need to begin rigorously examining today?